I'm Pam. I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I'm a person living with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I am a badass. And I'm a badass because I am a survivor. And I'm actually feeling pretty badass these days. I'm feeling more confident, more at peace, and better than I thought I might ever feel again. And it's been about 2.5 years in since I developed severe PTSD. And I'm just so grateful for the fact that I am feeling good. And I know that this, is something that will likely go up and down, but it's, for me, almost it feels miraculous. I'm today talking about my own personal experience with repressed and recovered memories. And I'm doing this because I talked previously about some of the theory, but for me, repressed and recovered memories are a big part of my story. And they were really hard for me to accept. And I hope that by sharing my own story, I can help other people who are having similar struggles. So I'm going to start with the period, and I think it was roughly about 3 years ago, when I first realized that something was wrong. And what happened was I was gathering memories to either support or go against a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder for the man who I would ultimately come to understand to be my abuser. When I went to try to pull up childhood memories, I realized I had none. None of him. I had no memories of my mother. I had very few memories of toys, friends, couldn't remember the layout of the bedrooms that I'd had as a child. And I really could not remember what it was like to be in my own shoes and think from my own perspective as a child. It was gone. And I both knew that it was very odd to not have those memories, but also it was weird to me that I never went back to them before. And I knew something was wrong, and I did do some research, and childhood sexual abuse came up, and I was just convinced that that was not possible. It wasn't that I didn't think that my abuser was capable. He'd been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder like 30 years ago, and I clearly was, having some major denial issues, which I now know was a, key part of my life. But I, kind of let it go. I started therapy to work through my relationship with my abuser, and I was on kind of a pause at that point. And I really needed some help in understanding whether or not this was a relationship that I could still have. And just a few weeks into doing therapy, I had this one day where I just suddenly had this moment of knowing that something terrible had happened to me that I couldn't remember. And it was just, that was all I got. And it was a knowing. I haven't had this happen before or since, but it just sort of dropped on me like, this happened. But I can't tell you what or when or where or, anything else. I'm just telling you something terrible happened. And it really kind of freaked me out, but like I got nothing and I let it go. Even before I started therapy, I had been having nightmares about my abuser. And in those nightmares, he was doing things that were, kind of unaligned to narcissistic personality disorder. So they weren't sexual, But then I did have a nightmare that was. And in it, we were both much younger, and he was attempting to sexually assault me. And it was really disturbing. And I mentioned it in passing to my therapist. And he said to me, you know, sometimes the subconscious tells us things through dreams in this way. And I said that I was sexually abused, and he said that the person in your dream sexually abused you. I really was so far away from being receptive to believing that. I kind of dismissed it, but at the same time, I became obsessed with it. I knew that my abuser was capable of it because I had come to put together the pieces of behavior. And I had come to recognize that, he has narcissistic personality disorder, and it's, very high up on the spectrum. I started to have, for the first time ever, panic attacks, which made me feel like I was suffocating. They were really very disruptive and awful. I also began to have, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was having flashbacks. And for me, they were mostly emotional and body sensations. And emotional, they were this fear that would start to develop in me at night when it was, kind of coming up on bedtime. And I would see this ring of light from the hall light coming through the outline of my door. The light would be out in my bedroom. And for some reason, I was so terrified. And it just didn't make any sense. And I was really afraid of who was going to open that door. But yet I didn't know who was going to open that door. It's just crazy. I did have some body sensation flashbacks. One of them, I felt as if I were a child being lifted and then being pinned down. And it was awful. It felt like it was happening at the time. And I went to see a psychiatrist because I really needed medication. I picked a great one. And in telling her my story, I said, but I'm struggling with this because I have no memory. How could I have no memory? And she said to me, you do have memories. The flashbacks are memories. She diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder, major depressive disorder, and panic disorder, but mostly it was PTSD causing the other things. And she explained to me that in order for me to be making this up, I would have to have a history of, another mental disorder, and I had no history of it at all. In fact, people have often said I'm the most sane person they know, but I certainly didn't feel it then. I took medication, and it helped me feel a little bit better briefly, and then the symptoms just kept getting worse. I decided, partly in desperation, to try an approach called eye movement desensitization and recovery therapy. And this is called, more conveniently, EMDR. It works by stimulating both sides of the brain, and it can be done through pulses of light moving back and forth, or it can be done through touch, or it can be done through sound. It is well studied. It's been used for a few decades now. My EMDR therapist had been doing it for well over a decade when I started working with her. And I was going through a period of denial. And so I said to her, I have these symptoms, but I have no memory of, being sexually abused as a child. I don't know. And so she agreed, we would just go into it with an open mind, didn't really know one way or another. And in the first session, which we actually did EMDR, immediately I began to recover memories. They were right there. And they were horrific. It was so hard in those early days of doing the EMDR therapy. I ended up having to take a medical leave because I was in a medical leave of absence from work. I was in no condition to be working. And also I really needed to, I needed treatment. My condition was potentially life-threatening. Life was not worth living at that point for me. I continued on with the treatment, and I did start to see improvement. It did start to take away the emotional charge that I had been feeling. And during this period, I decided it was time for me to tell some of the people closest to me in my life. And the reason why was that I realized that if I had some sort of, easy to see physical issue, I would tell people. So why was it when I was having, a very serious mental health issue, because I had severe PTSD and severe depression, that I, felt this need to hide it. And so I told a few of the people closest to me. What surprised me is I got some stories back. I hadn't provided a lot of detail of what happened to me, in fact, almost none at all. But I learned that my abuser, the man who sexually assaulted me when I was a child, also attempted to sexually assault women and girls. And I was also surprised to learn that how he attempted to sexually assault me was identical to how he attempted to sexually assault someone else. And that was a point of no return for me, intellectually at least, because I could no longer deny that it happened, because the likelihood of me making up the exact same pattern, just not possible, unless I'm a mind reader, and I don't think I am. So I do still go into denial. I realize that sometimes I need, my security blanket of denial. I do have flashbacks sometimes, but the EMDR really helped so much with my symptoms. They are much milder, and my depression, as a result, also has improved considerably. The flashbacks can be really hard because they relate to a graphic sexual act, which is horrible to think about, and really makes me feel exploited, violated, and all of those other things. And so sorry for that child who was forced to do that. But as I started, I'm really recovering and accepting the truth and knowing the truth in the long run has been a gift. I am so much stronger than I thought I was, and there's just so much more to me than I ever knew. And so that's my story. I look forward to sharing more about my story, hopefully to help other people who are going through a similar experience. And I invite you to share in the comments topics that you think would be most helpful to you. So thanks for watching, and I look forward to talking to you again.